It's an absolute pleasure to be here. I'm Sarayu. I'm the founder of Aapti Institute.
I'm Gaurav Sharma. I'm a fellow in studying AI governance, but I'm on a leave of absence from German Development Corporation. I'm an advisor there on AI for social impact-based projects, currently based in Bonn, but shall be permanently based in India.
Thanks for the question, Jubin. I think we started with a common set of questions around the adaptability, applicability, and development of AI for climate change. Though Gaurav and I both come from slightly different orientations and backgrounds. And I think that's what made the journey of writing the paper as well as this discussion hopefully very interesting. Gaurav was looking at the question of AI development from the perspective of climate data, and I'll hand it over to him to say more about it. But thinking through what kind of data is available, how that might be made relevant from the perspective of climate change, and what some of those challenges might be. Whereas on the other hand, I was coming at it from a policy side, thinking of what kind of enabling policy environment is required, what kind of policy mechanisms are required in order to be able to think of and use AI in the context of climate change. And this made for a very natural and very productive discussion in terms of writing the paper, because though the starting points were different, the concerns around whether it's even possible to develop AI in the current scenario, what the appropriate comparison models might be, etc., remain to be understood. So that's, I guess, in a certain way, the origin of the paper, but hopefully want to unpack more over the course of this discussion.
Yeah, thank you, Sarayu. I think my orientation was, I started with because I had been engaging with the Climate Change AI, which is a Stanford-based NGO led by a group of enthusiasts, and now it has become a big forum of talking about climate change. And I had attended a couple of webinars, which made me excited about, okay, there is a lot of talk about use of AI in climate change, but then people do not really understand that it's not a plug and play, which you can say use it in, because of like in ChatGPT or in large models. So my excitement started coming from where exactly is the use sort of happening, and is it really having a social impact? Can I actually take it out into the realm of soil moisture prediction or precipitation prediction? So more or less of the current AI talk in climate change is basing itself on energy efficiency, or looking at buildings emitting heat and the GHG emissions and all, which are still predominantly and can be done to an sort of effect at a level which should be required and can be ascertained, but not on areas which are actually, say, benefiting a farmer or somebody from who wants to look at very regional or local impact or acute microclimatic changes. So that was the sort of a larger understanding of trying to weave together these discussions and saying, okay, there is a lot happening, but is it really happening, or it is more on a global level, which is really happening? Yeah. It is still, if you take, say, language models or DALI 2, which are still crawling the data from the internet. This is like a foundational layer. And now on top of that layer, people are trying to have downstream tasks. So if you are trying to say, okay, we want to have understanding on asking questions on climate, can we really put some specific data sets of climate on top of it and then do it? So there are models like BERT, which had climate BERT integrated and then utilized by some technical people and asking only climate-based questions. The thing about large AI models is that they are not capturing useful information in a sense which are specific to climate data sets or content creation, that you need for predictive modeling. They are still assimilating more of this information, and then specialized downstreaming tasks are being undertaken. But nothing has been commercialized. What you mentioned about from Google in Telangana, they still have to take the ground truth data sets from, say, 10,000 fields incorporate it, put it on a their search engine, and then try to see whether they're answering the right questions for that particular community. And that has to be very specific. I want to know in next 3 months what will be my precipitation levels for my paddy fields, because now erratic rainfalls can really have impact. I don't know, the southern monsoons of India. So it has to be very district specific. So what they're actually still doing is, if they take 10,000 farms from 4 or 5 districts, they are still holding it and saying, okay, how much of an efficiency can we provide? And these models are still not in a range of 90% efficiency. They will still remain 60 to 70, 80% maximum, depending on the quality. So large AI models are pretty impressive in areas which already have good data sets, like, again, finance, banking, insurance, but they will not have such impacts in areas which require these social impact spaces, and also healthcare. I mean, for your sector as well, you understand it better, that even for granular sets, it's just a mismatch as of now. So Vadvani is doing something very special, because they are solving a particular problem, country specific, from scratch. So they have a team of ML engineers who created this cotton pest management algorithm. They tested it on 50,000 farmers, and they're still evolving their data sets. And this is all in open source, so GitHub. And what they're doing is, so they took up a very special problem, they put it on an India-centric level, they took up this topic, and this is what it's solved. So the work of Vadvani is special. It's like if I ask Google that from tomorrow, please contribute to collecting data sets for one special social area problem, but they have to start doing it from the ground up. What Vadvani is doing is, they are doing the special agricultural advisory services on top of it, right? With language, right? So that can be done, but the base is still going to the fields, asking 10,000 farmers to take photos, collecting those photos, and deriving that algorithm which can actually analyze these photos and do some predictive modeling on, say, please irrigate your field, please use this type of pesticide, and this is the stage of your pest engagement. So it's a little, it's very special. I mean, that's why Vadvani's work is actually incredible, and they are very applauded for it. Yeah, synthetic data is still being experimented, as far as I know, because synthetic data can become very nice, because I know, because generative approaches and these contrastive approaches to AI big models are expanding but I would not feel so. I mean, in a sense, climate data is very much synthetic, in a sense of developing it, because you have interpolation of data sets, you have fill up those data sets, you impute the data, where there are sort of in situ observational data sets. But synthetic data sets viability has still not been explored. I think it is still in experimentation phase, where when it comes to these aspects. Yeah.
That question, I think that there are two dimensions to the policy conversation. One is the role that policy can play in enabling, for example, the development of AI with specific purposes, climate change, but also potentially in other areas. So there's the role that policy plays as an enabler, and there are some parameters to understand that. And secondly, there's the role that policy needs to play in terms of governing, particularly with the emergence of certain types of AI, which are very sensitive applications in the area of health, as well as in the context of climate. Even certain large language models can have very significant societal implications if their use is ungoverned or unchecked. So there's the role that policy has to play in terms of governing these kinds of AIs. In terms of the enabling, and I think we're at a stage where we need to discuss the enabling as much as the governance, I suppose, but perhaps even more. But there's a role that policymaking can play on aspects of data preparedness and availability, ensuring that there are not silos in conversation. I think there's also a broader question of data justice, which is part policy, but also part geopolitics, which is, I think, Gaurav alluded to it, in that global South data sets are not necessarily as represented in the broader conversations around climate AI. So the role of policy in this specific area can perhaps be understood from the lens of enabling. But we shouldn't walk away too quickly from the governance question or think that it's very far off, because we've already seen anecdotal evidence of how unconstrained, unchecked use of AI, even in very narrow cases, can actually have deep potential consequences. And there's evidence that, for example, in the context of climate, there's particularly large language models and the role that they can play is rife with misinformation. And to the extent that some of it has informed, influenced, engaged with, intersected with electoral politics in very many large democracies. Now, for us to be able to tackle what that might do as you bring in more accurate information, but necessarily something that might not resemble the truth, I think it's very important for us to be a little careful of how this AI is governed. So measures such as non-price related access controls, post hoc enforcement, all of those are things that we need to start thinking about upfront. So in summary, I think, thinking about policy as an enabler. So what actions need to be taken to ensure that some of the good development happens, as well as the longer term governance. So to think through questions of how do you navigate harm, grievances, just societal protection more broadly is critical. Two thoughts, I would say. One, of course, is that, AI, and Gaurav is perhaps far more capable of explaining it, is not yet able to predict with very relevant micro accuracy the likely occurrence of climate events. So there's that one challenge, and that is part originated in the data set, part originated in the fact that this is all siloed. There are very many reasons for it, but there is some element of technological progress to be made in that dimension. The second dimension is, and I think this is reflective of the policy conversation for sure in India, but as you see the evidence from around the world, I think echoed in very many parts of the globe as well, is that it is, despite having information, meteorological systems, for example, around climate events are not terrible. So you do know. You might not have micro accuracy, but you do know. But yet the fact that responses are from different institutions and there are frictions in communications between different state actors themselves causes a lot of the harms that are associated, the offline manifestations of the harm. So this is not an AI problem as much as it is an institutional and a structural problem. But to think that increase in accuracy, increase in predictability from AI translates into better action at the ground level is a false assumption, and therefore the enabling role of policy cannot stop at data preparedness. There's a broader institutional readiness to be able to respond to this kind of evidence as well.
You are right. Actually, the policy thinking behind climate change is still rooted and in a larger national dimension. So if it has to be like the Ministry of Forest and Climate Change, and they understand this, but at a micro level, and so what they do is basically say, okay, let's plant trees, let's have afforestation drives and things like this. Whereas the thinking which is required for technical implication of like AI based systems is, on one hand, it is good because it is not touching on personal data. Okay, so it's good that you can actually work on non-personal data sets, which are climate data sets. But on the other hand, India is a very special topography. So the Ministry of Space and Ministry of Earth Sciences and Ministry, the sort of meteorological departments will not share their data sets because we have India and Pakistan and India and China. So if you start sharing these satellite-based data sets, there is a security component which comes. So people are restricting themselves. That's what I'm saying. So when Indian startups are utilizing data sets, they're actually taking data sets from NASA or European Space Agency, the Copernicus or the Sentinel-2 programs for deriving certain models for India on very specific cases. But they're not taking India, which has almost 10 to 15 satellites which are only doing weather forecasting or meteorological other things, because it's not access. And there are sort of repercussions of that regard. But coming to the questions, I've seen in Assam, there have been certain initiatives for predicting floods, because it's a perennial problem, it's a recurring effect, so something. And these type of very state-specific, issue-based issue-specific agendas are taking shape. So Telangana also started taking this crop map for data collection. They certainly want to know how the crop changes are taking shape because of weather changes. And they want to understand what should be the maximum retail price of setting up crop. So I believe that it's a good thing that India gives leverage for innovation without putting so much restriction, at least on the climate side. But it can really, I come to that answer of what Sarayu gave on social justice. I will put only two statements there. It's one very simple statement is, if you take large language models, it is still the 80% data is basically coming from big economies, which have access to Facebook, or you just say social media and then you cover 80%, or India, which has WhatsApp and everything, right? So 3 billion people don't have access to internet. So where is their voices on large language model? There are no voice for those 3 billion people who don't have access to internet. So that's where I rest my case, in a sense of how these language models are being unequal in terms of global south. On the climate special issues, even if you have to set up meteorological stations like ground stations, you will have fewer stations in Congo, but you will have more stations in New Zealand. Right? It's a simple economic divide. And hence you will not be able to capture the same data sets for even simple as rainfall for Congo, because you don't have many stations, because it's conflict area or whatever. And you will have many better data sets for New Zealand, which is a very small country, but still has better capital to do this. So I think that's where it is for me.
Okay, I think you highlight a very, very critical point in terms of thinking through, more broadly, I guess, what is called as data justice and climate justice, in that very many parts of the world are completely dark. To that extent, the policy conversation is part national, but definitely also global. And climate change in that sense has no barriers or borders. It doesn't recognize that this is the border between Germany and Belgium, or between India and Pakistan. And any such climatic event is not acknowledging those kinds of divides. So there is a need for a global conversation around AI. And this criticism is leveled at very much technology development, in that it's dominated by the global north. In fact, norm setting around AI, but also all digital technologies, has also taken place in the global north. And to make a very micro point around this, the data which Gaurav alluded to it, that large language models have been trained on, also come from the global north. So so the problems of representation are multifaceted, and therefore one that is not just a functional question of how do you develop the AI, but it's a deeply political one, which involves sort of making sure that there is equal representation. The thing with climate change, and I think again Gaurav has brought this up multiple times, is that every piece is as critical, and it has nothing to do with the availability of resources in that context, but the value that the data itself provides, such as data from Congo or wherever else where there are lesser resources to be able to deploy technologies to be able to access the data. So some of these conversations also require the presence of philanthropies, sort of different kinds of institutions, multilateral agencies, which have been longer term involved in the development conversation, to be involved in this one as well. India's presidency of the G20 this year, and I think it's going to Brazil next year. All of these are definitely opportunities and historic moments to broad base the conversation between the sort of the traditional set of entities that make decisions, and multilateral fora present that opportunity, particularly when it's a leadership by a country. And I think in this instance, India is taking the leadership in terms of demonstrating the role around digital public goods, digital public infrastructures, and how digitization more broadly, not necessarily anchored around AI, can play a role. So there are all moments in time where issues get highlighted, and they definitely provide that opportunity. But I think the labor is also much more long-term and requires much more concerted effort from multiple institutions coming together, which has to happen in parallel to these big moments and what they provide for the climate change discourse. And this means more regular conversations, more active engagement from nations that have the capacity, because national borders are not going away anywhere. So organizations, nations that have the capacity must play a role in bringing in a wider set of actors into the debate, because climate is, you can't develop walled gardens around climate. Like it has no meaning. And therefore, there is a natural set of incentives that plays, but you require the labor in the longer term to bring in more wide. But civil society organizations should also have representation in that way. So that work has to be done in the longer term.
So I think there are two conversations to it. First thing is, there is a deficit of data sets which is apparent. So even till the time we have a really artificial intelligence, like a real artificial intelligence machine which is not looking at data sets, it's very hard to really get into these predictive modeling for these spaces. So I mean, the sense is very simple. You have cyclones hitting, you have hurricanes hitting, you have these events. What you generally do is you are still working on a mitigation adaptation strategy, right? So what has been understood is that, okay, the impact is AI should actually come in to give us better planning, predictive modeling for planning, not for pushing it back. So that's where I think the data are not, I mean, continental wise, by the way, I'm not even saying, so if I know at least of an agency like in Europe which is collecting weather data, they do not have anything in Africa or in larger Asia. So those things have to be done nationally. The second requirement is there is an infrastructure cost for data collection in climate change. It's not very aerial that you can do it with satellites and something. I think this is a very fundamental point. For anything which I've tried to mention is the larger events are below 100 meters. You need high resolutions. You don't know how aerosols actually interact with clouds and how clouds really interact with aerosols in terms of CO2, air pollution, all those things, right? Sulfur. And that's where the whole interpretation actually comes in. So fundamentally, if you need to collect data, even in cities like Delhi or Mumbai, even in global south big cities, you need to put infrastructure to be able to collect that data sets. And hence, till the time that is happening, you are at a loss somewhere. And multilateral organization can play such role in at least normative sense of policy making sense, but they really can't, put things in order, because it is the national government's own prerogative where they want to go, what they want to do. So I think the first thing is opening these conversations and understanding climate with regards to not having fascination about large AI models. So there is a disconnect between what is real, can be done, how, yes, no, maybe, right? The second context to the conversation of the paper is that we have to start investing in understanding the typology of data sets that are required for our fundamental problems. So if India facing a heat wave in the North India in the last 2 years, such as biggest, where should we really invest? Should we invest in understanding groundwater table assessment, or should we understanding in, say, flood prevention in the North? So there has to be very country-specific use cases, and this has to be understood that these conversations are not across the board and they're not transversive. They have to be very focused, sensitive, and country specific and driven. I think that's where we want to bring these conversations to the decision makers, at the top level. Yeah.